Falcons Audible presented by AT&T is back, and yes, we are here. We are post-draft coverage mode right now. You got Rack, you got DJ, you got Arch, and guys, let's dive into it because there's been so much discussion about the entire draft, whether it's the Falcons, it's the NFL, but we are here to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. So if you're a Falcons fan, if you're an NFL fan, if you're a football fan, get ready. Because we about to give it to you, okay? Hey, guys, by the way, I just hyped it up, so we got to be good. Bring it, okay? All right, so let's go. Let's get into this, and let's just start with, as I've heard Terry and Raheem say, the elephant in the room, the quarterback situation, okay? Not only was it a focal point this entire offseason from the moment that Raheem Morris was hired, he even said it himself, the elephant in the room was the quarterback situation. Addressed it in free agency with Kirk Cousins, and then arguably pulled off the surprise of the first round by picking a quarterback with their 8th overall selection in Michael Penix Jr. So there was a lot of question marks, and then after the end of the first round, Terry and Raheem came on and they did a press conference, and they kind of explained where they were going with the idea of picking Michael Penix. We talked about this a little bit last year. We talked about this in our pre-draft show. You never really know what the coaching staff and the personnel department, what they have between the ears, because they're not telling anything, right? But they decided that they wanted to make a play for the future, and they felt like they were not going to have an opportunity to be picking this high again with what they are projecting. They're going to start winning, so they plan on being at the latter ends of the draft from now on. So they said, we got a quarterback that we feel really good with. He fits the makeup. They always talking about the makeup, right?
Ethos.
The ethos. Yeah. That what they're looking for. And so, Shock, let's go ahead and start with you. Your initial impressions, and then after you heard the rationale, your thoughts behind the selection of Michael Penix Jr.
I'm glad you put it that way because I'm going to keep it a buck. I was kind of similar to every other fan that was outside the building of Flowery Branch, and I was confused. I didn't know why the pick was made. I didn't understand it. And that's because this entire time we felt as though the thing you just talked about was solidified. You have a quarterback here that can win ball games for you. That's the number one thing you talked about coming to the offseason was, hey, make sure we solidify this position and we're good. So we get to the 8th pick and we say, okay, we got our quarterbacks, we got receivers. What else do we need? What else is out there that could fill a need for this team? And obviously, similar to myself and everybody else who has followed this franchise, you thought, okay, well, it's time to go get an edge rusher or it's time to get a corner, time to fill that spot. So initially, I was a little confused. I didn't know why the pick was made, and I didn't understand it. But like you mentioned, they came out, they spoke on it, they talked about the scenario in which why they felt as though this was a home run for them. And I heard Terry say, he wanted everybody in the building from owner Arthur Blank to the scouts to love this pick. And it had to be made in this position because of where they feel the future is headed. And the other thing that I think confused me at first was I said, all right, at the beginning we talked about this was a team that wanted to win right now. And when you initially say, okay, let's draft a quarterback for the future, what is that saying about right now? But I thought after they explained it, it makes perfect sense on why they went this route and why he was the pick. Now, it could have been these other guys that's out there, but they felt as though Michael Penix Jr. was the guy that they wanted for the future, which gave them the opportunity to go out and get him. And kudos to them for keeping it all inside because that is something tough to do.
Exactly.
In this day and age, I heard Terry talk about, he had a situation back in the day with Patrick Mahomes and all that kind of stuff, and it got out. And this was the guy they really wanted. So I know there was a very, very small circle of people who knew about this possibility. And when it finally came to fruition, they explained it really well, and I'm all on board with it.
Arch, it's real easy for everybody out there to be our armchair general manager, right? To feel like
a lot of them,
that they've got every single answer, but none of those people sit in the chair. None of those people actually sit in the chair. And Terry actually talked about it in his their post draft press conference, saying a conversation he had with Bill Polian, where Bill Polian told him that when he got the job as a general manager, he said the most scrutinized people in this country are the President of the United States and sports general managers. So get used to it, right?
Yeah.
So Terry said it comes with the territory. You got to understand, you got to have broad shoulders, you got to have thick skin to be in this position. But I'm going to ask you the same question, Arch. Your initial impressions when you heard the pick, and then after the explanation, after you were able to stew on it a little bit, did your initial impression change at all?
Yeah, we sat here the Tuesday before the draft, or the Tuesday before the Tuesday of the draft, or whatever it was, and you and I both picked Dallas Turner, and you picked Quinyon Mitchell. So we were thinking along the same way. I'm sitting in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, not far from where Shock was. We were doing our radio show, and Shock would probably be a good way of describing it. When they made the announcement, I didn't know what to say. Because it was not what I was considering. I wasn't thinking along those lines or any of that kind of stuff. But as the term I used was, I marinated on it for a while. It got I don't know, Dale steak sauce, whatever I put on it. I marinated for a while. And when you begin to look at what they did, it makes a ton of sense. These guys said in their pre-draft press conference, both of them, or at least Terry said, we're going to draft the best player available for us. And that back end is very key, if you remember it. He said, for us. So if you look at this team, let's just go to the Matt Ryan era. This team got caught with its pants down when Matt Ryan left. You had no idea what you wanted to do. You tried to stopgap it. Mariota came in, you drafted Ritter, you had a lot of stuff you were trying to do, but it was all on the fly, okay? There was no plan in place. That very much resonates here too, is the succession plan. Yes, there's a chance that Michael Penix Jr. is not going to play for a couple of years. In fact, the grand scheme of things, in the perfect scenario, as you talked about, this team plans on winning a lot of games over the next couple of years. That means they're not picking in the early part of the draft. That means they don't necessarily have access to a guy like this. So that planning and future thinking was part of the mix as well. That, okay, in a perfect world, Michael Penix Jr. plays 2 years from now, 3 years from now, okay? So what's that look like? Did you give up an opportunity to get some key players? Well, what did you do in free agency? This team wasn't asleep in free agency.
Right.
They went and got guys. They put depth and stuff on this team. By the way, they went ahead and did a really good job of drafting in the second, third, and fourth rounds as well. As we'll talk about some of the players that are going to be on this football team and probably on the field on the first day of the games they play. So all that played in. And then you begin to look at the player. And as I got in that marination process and I looked at the player, just look at the player, this guy fits exactly what you want to be. I mean, 75-80% of this game, Shock and I'll tell you, having played the quarterback position, is played on time. We get so caught up in the periphery, the impromptu off-schedule plays that guys make. And, oh, by the way, this guy ran 4.59 at the Combine. He's going to be able to do some of that for you, did some of it in his career. But what did he do the last 2 years at Washington? He's 25-3. He played the game on time. And what has Raheem talked about repeatedly? Processing and getting the ball out. That's who Kirk Cousins is. That's who Michael Penix Jr. is. So if something happens to Kirk, in the unlikely event, hopefully nothing happens to him. But if he does, you're handing the ball to a dude you handpicked to play in this offense because of what he does, his ability to process and get the ball out on time. All you got to do is put any tape on you want to. You can even put the national championship game on if you want to. The things that he did in that game. Wasn't his best game, but he still did things, a lot of the stuff on time, and that's the way this game's played.
I want to add one more thing, Rack, before we get yours initial thought on it. And the more I marinate on it, like Arch mentioned, I thought about from day one what Raheem said and what things he put in place to help this position, but also to help this team. You're talking about first going out to get Zach Robinson as your OC. Then you move T.J. Yates back to coach the quarterbacks. Ken Zampese, DJ Williams, all these guys who are quarterback, who play the position, who know the position and been around the league for years and been able to do it. And he spoke about having those guys in the building that can help you with that process. Now, obviously we thought, okay, that was for Kirk Cousins, but also look forward. It was for this position as well. For when you think about going to get Michael Penix Jr., you have all these great minds coming together to come up with what they got, which was Michael Penix Jr. So if you ever question it, you have some guys who have been around and done it that absolutely know what this position looks like and what it looks like to play at a high level. And you can say, all right, it did just happen by one guy. Raheem liked him and say, all right, let's go get him. There is a multitude of people who went through this process and said, all right, this is the right guy, like Art mentioned, for this offense.
Art, you mentioned QB on the fly once or twice when you were talking about this, right? And I know Terry has said this on multiple occasions, that the quarterback position is the most important position in the game of football and in the National Football League. And so they had to address it. They had to, and what it said to me as soon as I heard the pick was, because I was not thinking quarterback, but what it said to me was quarterback is not going to be an issue for this organization anytime soon.
Right.
That's what it told me. And that's what this entire organization decided, is that quarterback is not going to be an issue for the Atlanta Falcons for the next, I don't know, call it 3 to 5 years. Don't know what's going to happen, right? The other thing that I thought about is Kirk Cousins is a competitor. We've seen that on the field. Don't you think maybe Kirk Cousins is going to lock in just a little bit more, even if the contract and the age and all that other stuff wasn't enough motivation for him? Don't you think that the fact that in the back of his head somewhere, he's saying, this organization just spent a first-round pick on my position. So what you might end up getting an even better version of Kirk Cousins moving forward, because the competitor in him is saying, I'm not giving up my job to this dude, because nobody in the NFL wants to give up their job to anybody, because you know how precious it is when you actually get an opportunity to step foot on the field. So they're going to have a healthy competition. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it back to you, because I want to get your thoughts on the quarterback, is processing information. You talked about all the people in the building, right, that are going to be able to help not only Michael Penix, but Kirk Cousins. But just think about how Michael Penix is going to be able to watch Kirk Cousins process information at an NFL level. Listen to one of the better guys out there, because Kirk's game is reading defenses and throwing the ball on time, right?
That's why he's here.
Exactly. So you got Michael Penix Jr. is going to be able to turn on the tape of every single practice that happens on this field behind us, and every single preseason game and every single game, and watch how one of the better quarterbacks in the league processes information, gets the ball on the time, and sees mistakes that he can kind of correct them in the meeting room before he even gets out on the field. So you've got a lot of really good things working for the entire organization. Nonetheless, those two players. Before we move on to the rest of the draft, because we got to get to some other guys, I want to get your opinion, your kind of scouting report on Michael Penix Jr., what you saw. I got two quarterbacks here. You guys are the most qualified to talk about the player.
Interesting enough, he was just one of those guys that I was kind of drawn to before even this process started. Was out at the NFL Combine and obviously paid a lot of attention to the quarterbacks, not thinking, oh, it has something to do with the Falcons, but just because we play the position. And you want to hear these guys talk. You want to hear what they're about. And I had a chance to, have maybe like a 3-4 minute conversation with Michael Penix as he was, leaving one of the podiums, and just introduce myself to him. Hey, man, enjoyed your game, all this kind of stuff. And throughout that conversation, in just that little time you got, you felt as though he was one of those kind of guys that you knew from day one was a leader, was a guy that you wanted to be a part of your team. And one thing that I wrote down was, this guy has the follow me factor. And when I say that, that means off the field, on the field. I wrote down some attributes about him that, when you turn on the tape or you talk to him. I had a chance to talk to him on Friday when he came in, with his introduction to press conference and all that. I had a chance to sit down with him and just shoot the breeze. And certain things just stuck out to him. And one thing you like about him is he has a charisma about him. And to have that as your quarterback, a guy who is out in front all the time, he just has that kind of, aura about him when he walks into the room, when he's shaking hands, when he's talking to people, and you got to like that. Very likable, easy to communicate with. You understand his teammates, they love him. You can look at any videos you have. They're always having a good time. They're back and forth. He has a little swagger about him, too. As we know in Atlanta, having a little swagger at the quarterback position or having it anywhere, period, is a big thing. And then you start thinking about some of the things that he did on the field. Great pocket movement, good vision, understands arm angles, understands, how to layer footballs. And he gets talked about a lot. Throws a really damn good deep ball. We've seen that. We know that. But you turn on tape, you see him making all type of different throws all over the field, and that gives you even more reassurance that this guy gets it. He understands it upstairs. He understands it with his feet. And Art, you mentioned he ran a 4.59. He can move. He can run. He's probably surprised a lot of people. But the last 2 years, he didn't even use it. A lot of people questioned, could he move, because he didn't. Because he was such a prolific passer inside the pocket that people didn't even recognize, oh, he actually can move. He can run. He can actually get escape. And those are some of the things that I looked at and said, man, the quick release, just having that mental capacity to be able to understand. And we all talked about the process is a big part of it. But when you're around him, you feel like he is that franchise guy. You feel like you just know he's a quarterback from day one. And I enjoyed sitting down talking to him, man. Very humble kid. Had a bunch of his family here. Everybody was excited. But just the fact that you get that kind of guy who can come and learn, is willing to learn. And one last thing I heard throughout this process, there were a couple guys who the Falcons wanted to work out. And they said, oh, no, we'd probably be gone by that time. We don't need to work out. He was one guy that said, yeah, I want to work out. Mm-hmm. And I thought that spoke volumes that anytime he get a chance to compete, like we just talked about with Kirk Cousins, he wants to do it. And I thought that spoke volumes, too, about who he is as a player but also as a person. Regardless of what's going on, this guy is a guy you want to be at the helm of your offense.
Here's the last thing I'll say on Michael Penix, and then we'll get to the last part of the draft to kind of close this thing up, is I love the quote that came out that said, obviously we know about all the injuries that he had at Indiana. And they were asking him about it, and the quote was, they can do all the MRIs and everything that they want to do on my body, but what they really need is to do an EKG to basically see what's in my mind and what's in my heart. For sure. And I was like, he kind of just mic dropped on y'all. He said, I don't care. You can do all the little the evaluations you want on me medically, but you better find out what's up here first. Sure. And maybe that's what won this organization over. So, Michael Penix Jr., 8th overall, first round, 2024 draft. All right, guys. So we thought defense might have been the spot for number 8 overall. Well, let's talk about 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round, because that's where the focus shifted to. So, Arch, I'm going to come back to you.
Well, I can't wait to hear him call his name out.
I'm going to give you 3 names, and I'm going to let you go wherever you'd like to go with this, all right? 2nd round, Ruke Orhorhoro out of Clemson, Bralen Trice out of Washington, and Brandon Dorlus in the 4th round. All 3 defensive linemen / outside linebackers. Give us a little scouting report and what you like most about these guys, Arch.
Well, let's couple Ruke Orhorhoro with Brandon Dorlus, because what you're getting are versatile defensive linemen that are very similar players from a size standpoint, both about 6'3", 6'4", about 285 to 295. Both are very similar guys. What you see when you put Ruke's tape on is a violent player that plays to a certain, which is kind of cool, kind of plays a little bit out of control, kind of plays a little bit high, which he'll have to work on at the National Football League level, get his pad level down. But when he picks a side and decides that's where he's going, there's not a lot of people that stop him. And I think that what you saw with he and Dorlus, the young man out of Oregon, was position versatility. These are guys, because you're making a transition to a hybrid 3-man line, you now have Dorlus and Orhorhoro can play from the 1 technically all the way out to the 5 technique. So you're talking about 3 technique, 5. So they can play all along the line. Where were you hurt last year from an injury standpoint? Grady Jarrett goes down with a knee. You lost David Onyemata for a significant amount. You had guys playing that were off of the streets that we had to look them up, who they were. You've got some depth now as you add these 2 guys in, and they're young guys that have had success. Now, do they need to work on their games? Yeah. But to go back to what Terry said in his pre-draft press conference, we're going to draft the best player available for us. And why these 2 guys fit is because of their position versatility and their relentlessness with which they come off the ball. They're splitters of gaps. You're not asking these 2 guys to 2-gap or anything. You're going to give them a side, and they're going to rip through people, and they have the ability to do that. Bralen Trice is a guy that has a more polished game. This is a guy that comes in from Washington, had outstanding success. You go back 2 years ago, he and Will Anderson were the top 2 pressure makers on the quarterback in the entire nation. So this guy has success. He's got a mature game. By that I mean he's got multiple moves to get to the passer. You essentially got a guy that many had rated in the back end of the first round, and I had him on my top 5 edge rushers in our evaluation on AtlantaFalcons.com. He was one of the 5 I talked about. They had him rated in the back end of the first round, early second round. You got him in the third round, like 75th pick. This guy had first-round grades all over him. Why didn't he go in the first round, you're asking? Didn't run 4.5. Didn't run 4.46 like Dallas Turner did. He ran 4.7 or something like that. But when you put the tape on, he has what I termed on those breakdowns, he has a last play mentality every play. He plays with a relentlessness and a motor that doesn't turn off. And by that, you got a guy that's going to make a lot of plays for you. That's my evaluation of those 3 guys.
One thing I wanted to point out, Arch, you mentioned that Ruke's game was a little bit out of control. I'm sure you guys might have seen it, but if you didn't get a chance, like listen to Ruke's conversation when he got the phone call about him getting drafted. He was going out of control when they found out that he was getting drafted. I mean, to the point to where he wouldn't even let Arthur Blank, the owner, talk to him. He was going nuts with all the people that was at his draft party. Let's go. Y'all got a dog. I'm ready to go to work. I mean,
I told y'all.
It was pretty entertaining. So if you haven't seen it, make sure you go look that up. It's pretty cool to see. DJ, I'm going to ask the same question to you. Which of these 3 guys sticks out to you as a guy that's going to be a potential difference maker, maybe early on for this Atlanta defense?
I think it has to be Bralen, the last guy that Arch mentioned, because of his ability to be able to, like mentioned, he's one of the more polished guys that's come out the league. And he's a guy that stuck out to me. When you watch Washington, he was a guy that I watched. I saw that number 8 all the time, and he was a guy that showed up for you. So when his name came across the board, he said, oh, this is a guy you can get in the third round. You felt as though this is a guy that can come in from day one and add value. Now, not saying the other 2 guys won't add value, because I think they will, but I think Bralen comes in and has that kind of distinctive nature about him that he's going to find a way to get on the field. Whether it's a third down, maybe it's in a rush package, where he's going to find a way to be a part of the mix and be a guy that you can actually depend on when you open up the year.
Yeah, he's probably the one of those 3 that I'm the most excited to see if he ends up being the difference maker, probably just because we talk so much about an edge rusher. And Arch, you talked about, again, for those that may not be that football savvy, you talked about the other 2 guys as being inside, like one technique, meaning out to a 5, right? So you're looking at a guy that can line up over the center, right over the top of the center, anywhere out to the outside shade of a tackle, right? So these guys are basically playing inside of the tackles, whereas Bralen Trice is probably going to be more of your prototypical 9 technique. Maybe he's going to line up on the outside shade of the tackle, but he's likely going to be somewhere out there in space, so he can go and use some athleticism, use his length that we're talking about so much. Terry and Raheem talking about length. Raheem loves length, right? He brings some length to this defense, but you also got 2 disruptors inside that you got some depth behind, because they also talked about it's the one position on the field where you're seeing probably the most rotation, right? Your offensive line, you might have 8 of them active on game day. You're pretty much seeing 5 of them play, right? You're seeing 1 quarterback play. You're seeing 3 or 4 wide receivers, but you're generally seeing your defensive front rotate, right? If there's 60 plays in a game, it might be 40 to 35 for one and 25 for the other, right? So they're going to play a lot if these guys prove during training camp and during the preseason that they're ready to go out and compete for this organization. Guys, let's wrap this up with the final 4 selections. J.D. Bertrand out of Notre Dame. You got an inside linebacker. You got a running back, Jase McClellan from Alabama. You got a wide receiver in Casey Washington from Illinois. And Zion Logue, a dog from Georgia. Another big body for the interior of that defense. Let me start with you, DJ. Which of those 4 guys sticks out to you the most?
I'm excited to see a J.D. Bertrand, man. Obviously a guy from this area with the Blessed Trinity. An athletic guy from that linebacker position. Actually played both sides of the football in high school, played offensive linebacker and also running back on that side. You know he has the athleticism, but then goes to Notre Dame and is a leading tackler the last 3 years. Had the C on his jersey. At a place like Notre Dame, you know it means a lot. You watch this guy, he is a downhill thumper, wants to get to the football, probably not going to be confused at all because of the way he plays. But you're talking about a guy who led the team in tackles last 3 years, 76 last year, 2.5, but is just won a state title, on 2 state titles in high school. But a guy that if thrown in the void, you need a guy like last year. We had Nate Lamon throw in there, and the guy played excellent. Yep. J.D. Bertrand, I think, fits similar mode of, hey, if something happens to your inside guys or you need an athletic guy to come in there and run and move around, he is that kind of guy. So I like J.D. Bertrand as one of those type of players to really pay attention to. And then, he's going to be a really good player on teams. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of this process as well. Like a Casey Washington as well, a speedy kind of guy. You expect to see him at gunner who can show up for you and be a real guy on that 4th down play for you and be big for you. So I like those 2 guys for the fact of they're going to add great depth for you, but also are probably going to be stalemates from day one on your special teams.
Yeah, Arch, you're probably looking at, not to take anything away from these guys as far as their ability to play on offense or defense, but you're looking at more teams guys, somebody that's going to provide depth for you, but is maybe going to be on the punt team. They're going to be on the punt return team, and they need to go out there and take care of that business, show a willingness to do that. And then if their number is called due to injury or due to lack of production, then that's when you step up and you contribute at an inside linebacker position, at a wide receiver position. Which one of those 4 guys sticks out to you?
Yeah, I mean, Shock did a really good job of breaking those guys down. I guess that instead of camping on J.G. Bertrand, what I'll do is mention with Bertrand and Trice, both were team captains. You mentioned War of the Sea. It's something that I've talked to Terry Fontenot about a number of times. He loves guys that were those kind of guys for their team, that were elected by their teammates to be captains. Why is that a big deal? Well, they're self-starters. They're guys that you're not going to have to encourage to get going in practice. They're going to be the guys doing that even though they're young guys because that's the role they played in college. And so they're going to bring that to the table here. And so you love self-starter type guys, and that's what a lot of team captains are. Trice and Bertrand both held that mantle when they were in college at Washington and Notre Dame. I think Casey Washington, and I'm going to liken him to a guy we picked in a very similar situation probably about 6 or 7 years ago, a guy named Russell Gage that we drafted that had not played a lot of receiver or had not garnered a lot of attention as a receiver or racked up a lot of numbers until his senior year, and then it was still a little bit slight there. This kid is very similar to that. He can run. He's got good size, 6'2", about 200 pounds, but as Shock talked about, this guy's can be a monster for you on special teams. And, oh, by the way, he had 218 yards receiving in his last game against Northwestern. He had 85 balls thrown at him. He dropped 3 passes. So if he does get pushed into wide receiver duty, the dude's going to catch the rock when you throw it to him. I mean, his track record would say that. Logue is a guy that's going to be another rotational guy. If he's going to be a developmental guy too. Talk about Zion. He's a guy that got to play at Georgia, played a lot of games, but was more of a guy that they plugged in from time to time. And Shock can talk more about him, but he's a guy at 6'6", 315, 320 pounds that becomes one of those bodies that if he does get to play on game day and is active on game day, which there may be some developmental pieces to that as we move forward in his career. You love those guys you can kind of develop on your practice squad or at the back end of your roster that ultimately are going to have to play probably because of the, just the guys going down. He has the opportunity to come in and do that because of the big body. Jase McClellan's another guy that'll be a special teams guy. He was a solid runner, nothing flashy about him. He does have really good vision. If you watch him on tape, he is a really quick decision maker. Doesn't have great top end speed, but all of a sudden you look up and he averaged 5.6 yards a carry for Alabama. So that's a guy that if he does get plugged in at running back, that third running back position, he's going to be able to come in and do some stuff, but he's also going to contribute on special teams. So all in all, I thought they got a bunch of guys that are self-starters, like I said, but guys are going to come in and are going to contribute as you start talking about depth.
The self-starter is a big thing. And the other part about the last 2 guys you mentioned, Jase and Zion Logue, 2 guys who were patient, guys who knew their role. You think about the last few years, how long did it take for Jase McClellan to play at Alabama? Yeah. And then when he finally got his opportunity, he was a big part of how good they were last year. So give him a lot of credit for understanding that he wanted to compete, but then also he held that role. And Zion Logue is another guy who, he played throughout his career, played a bunch of games for Georgia, but he also sat behind Jordan Davis, sat behind Jalen Carter, sat behind guys who were really the names and faces. And then he got his opportunity this last year and was a captain, played really well, and got on the radar and obviously caught the eye of the Falcons. So give those guys both a lot of credit for understanding their roles, which is going to be huge coming to the National Football League, like Art just mentioned, where you're probably going to be a developmental guy. You may be a practice squad guy. You may be a guy that's forced to be a scout team guy. So you got to make sure you know how to handle that particular role, and these guys have been in it, and they also have been at the highest of captains and all that kind of stuff part of their team.
Yeah, I mean, Terry and Raheem talked about how makeup is so important, and that probably was part of their decision-making process on those two guys. Like, they liked the makeup of those guys that stayed in it, stayed committed, waited for their turn, because guess what? At the position that they were drafted, you're probably going to have to wait your turn here in the NFL too, if you get a turn. Like, that's just how things work in the National Football League. But somebody that's willing and able to just go work every single day and wait for your opportunity and then seize that moment once you do. The last thing I'll say about these last four guys, and I don't want to take anything away from Casey Washington. He's going to kind of be excluded from this comment, but you had J.D. Bertrand from Notre Dame, you had Jase McClellan from Alabama, and you had Zion Logue from Georgia. Three what I would call purebred college football programs that are always in the spotlight, and guys that produced at programs that are always in the spotlight. There's always pressure on their shoulders at those three organizations. Take that for what it's worth, but it's another factor that I think coaches and personnel departments look at is these are guys that performed when they were constantly on television, constantly evaluated, constantly criticized, and in front of some really good coaching staffs. I mean, you can make an argument that Kirby Smart's staff and Nick Saban's staff is very close to an NFL staff, the way that they coach their players. So these guys have been coached extremely hard, and they're ready for this opportunity. So there you go. We broke it down from 1 to 7. Hopefully we gave you some nuggets. Hopefully we gave you some information. But that is the 2024 Atlanta Falcons draft class.
Art, you got any nicknames already for any of these guys yet?
Well, I'm thinking about going with Ruke Orhorhoro. Okay. Okay. I'm going to maybe his first name is actually tougher than his last name. They've simplified. Ruke is like 4 letters in the middle of his first name. So they did somebody a service at Clemson. His first name actually starts with an O too. So I thought 00, and if we could give him like number 7, could we put number 7 on him?
Oh, yeah, I like it.
Could we go 007?
007?
No, I'm just hedging my bet there. But, hey, how about Dorlus worth 3?
I
love the big dudes when they got the single digit numbers.
Trice with 8.
I love that.
See, I knew Arch had thought about it because, I know he got some good ones when he called the game.
00. I like that one for Ruke. Although a lot of people, if they don't know the story, they're going to be like, "Oh, what's the first O? His name is Ruke." But I know you're pretty safe if you go with Ruke. If in a broadcast, Arch, if you keep saying Orhorhoro, at some point you're going to get tripped over that. As broadcasters, we all know how that goes. All right, so there's our breakdown of 2024 Atlanta Falcons draft class. Again, this is looking out into the future, and maybe these guys end up being playmakers. They said that they were very busy in the offseason and free agency. And by the way, so the guys that were drafted last year or the year before, they're looking for them to take bigger steps in their game and be bigger contributors as we step closer to the 2024 NFL season. That's going to wrap it up here on the Falcons Audible presented by AT&T. We are here talking about all the big moments of the offseason, and I think the NFL draft classifies as one of those big moments.
Yes, it does.
That's DJ. That's Arch. I'm Rack. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care. We'll be back on the next big moment of the NFL offseason.